Hi, and welcome to the Interiors Insider podcast by AGC. I'm Tara, stepping in for Tori while she's off on mat leave. I can't wait to hear what today's special guest will share with us. So here we go. Good morning. Good morning, Eleanor. We are joined today by Eleanore Andrews, who is COO for Goldfinger. With March being B Corp Month, we thought it was really poignant to kind of have you here and thank you for joining us. It's a business, or Goldfinger is a business that we really admire. And as a fellow B Corp member and Walpole member, actually, we wanted to kind of, I suppose, delve a bit deeper into everything. From our sustainability manifesto at B Corp, we are really keen on kind of reaching 100% traceability on our products. And Goldfinger is a company that we really admire because actually you are kind of pushing that conversation forward. And it's just, I suppose it's kind of a refreshing example of kind of what you can do. So I'm going to kind of delve in with my first question already. And could you tell us a little bit about the business and kind of the journey into what you're doing?
Goldfinger was set up about 12 years ago, roughly. It was very much a community project that was set up at the foot of Tradic Tower, created by Eleanore Goldfinger, hence the name.
Right. Well, that's one question.
Absolutely. But the space that Eleanore Goldfinger created was very much community-led. It was supposed to be a shop, a workshop for the local community, and that's how Goldfinger sort of took it over. And the two co-founders were, one was very passionate about community and supporting the local community, and the other one was very passionate about recycling materials and workshop environments and making furniture. So those two worlds sort of came together, hence very much it's at the heart of the mission of Goldfinger to have those two items, sustainability and community, at its heart. So, unlike a lot of businesses that are on different paths and at different stages of their journey, this was the founding moment of Goldfinger, was those two elements. And as a community project, it sort of gradually evolves into, we'll do workshops, testing boundaries, seeing what works. And over the last 10 years, it sort of grew from strength to strength, attracting really strong brands, strong creatives who were very much drawn to that ethos, who wanted, to sort of support, both, pillars and have their own pieces made sustainably, and also know that they weren't just doing pretty things for pretty people, that they were also, their work was also having a positive effect around it, that sort of ripple, and supporting the local community where Goldfinger was, established. So, and it just grew from strength to strength, and now we are today.
Amazing. And I suppose that's what drew you to it, all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect.
Absolutely.
And I suppose there's a beautiful story behind it of where the materials began and what they then become. Could you share that with our listeners?
Of course. So inevitably that sort of foundation story of wanting to upcycle materials, there was the inevitable question of how do we source timber? If you're going to make furniture, most of it, if you're hand-making furniture, will be made with timber. And the landscape in the UK for sourcing sustainable timber is very difficult. There's only about 20% of the land that's covered by woodland. Half of it is owned by the public. The other half is private, and that's where most companies source. But only half of that is sustainably managed. So you can see how the pool sort of gradually shrinks.
Yeah, for sure.
And you also have to put that in context that other countries in Europe have vast woodland. I mean, it's 30-40% of their countries that are covered by woodland. So you can see that in the UK, it is a real subject. And two things sort of came very clear. A, we're living in London, which is considered a sort of urban forest by the UNESCO, which is a lovely sort of concept to think about. But a lot of trees are felled in London due to weather, a few storms have passed us.
Yeah.
There's also lots of urban development. A lot of those trees are native, elm, ash, oak, that really come from our land. But some of it is in perfectly good condition. It is high quality timber. And what happens to this timber, it usually gets chipped or burnt, which not only releases the carbon,
crazy to think. Yeah.
It's insane. But of course it takes a whole infrastructure to sort of know where the timber is going to be, assess its quality, go collect it, dry it, do all the things that we need to sort of do to transform a lovely tree into usable timber. So, that is something that, Goldfinger has been supporting, and there's a work with a network of people who have their ears on the ground and who know how to do this. So for a lot of our products, a lot of the pieces that we make for our clients, we use what we call tree cycle timber. And one of the reasons we absolutely love it is, trees, not only they're beautiful, it's lovely, but, we all know the benefits of it. You feel so much better when you're around trees and all these things. But trees are also deeply connected to a sense of memory, a sense of place. They tell you where they've grown, where they're from, how they've grown, were the weather conditions good or was it quite stressful? And all that story is interwoven into the timber you're going to get. All those lines, those knots, the colours you're going to get. All of these elements you will find in that timber. But it's also our own memories, childhood. We all ran around chasing a sibling or climbing that tree, wondering how to get down.
Getting stuck.
Absolutely. And so when we stamp the coordinates of the trees that we're using, we're sort of appealing to both sides. We're celebrating the history of the tree, but also our own memories with it. And I think when we make pieces of furniture for our clients, it's what we invite them to have in their own home. Invite those memories back in. Be more deeply connected to your environment. Because I guess when you reach that level where you can commission a piece of furniture that is going to be so special, what are you inviting in your home? And it's we want all of this to come into your home.
Gosh, that's really something special. And you say about stamping the coordinates. So is that's part of your kind of creative design?
Absolutely, it really is, because we realise that when you spoke earlier about traceability. It's one thing to say, it comes from London. Well, it's a very good point. But, if you really know where it comes from, why not celebrate it? Why not be able to trace it? And I think a lot of clients love this. But inevitably, tree cycling is very good, but it's not the answer to everything. If not, everybody would be doing it if it was so easy. And we encourage everyone to start doing it as well. So we also look to other certifications and source our timber here in the UK. And we try to follow and support Grown in Britain, because what's really lovely about that certification is that the measurements and the metrics and the methodology that they encourage is suited to the land, suited to types of trees, to types of forests we have, but also the sort of flora that we have here in the UK, but also the industry. What knowledge do we have? What is the backbone supporting all of this? So it's really fit for purpose. It is not an international certification. There is a one-size-fits-all. Yeah. So when we source our timber, we're very mindful that we're also supporting, good practice, but we're supporting people. And the same with tree cycling in many ways. You are supporting that knowledge, the tree surgeons, the people on the ground who will know how to handle it. If you don't support it, that knowledge will go. The industry, the infrastructure you need will go as well. So, for us, especially when we know that the quantities of sustainable timber available in the UK is really limited, we need to push to make sure that all of it that is available is sustainably managed. So that is our mission.
Love it. It's brilliant. And I suppose from your perspective, how important do you think interior designers, how important is it for them to understand how it's made, where it's specified, etc.?
I think it's really important, because when you design a piece of furniture, you're designing with materials, you're designing with processes. And if you don't appreciate the qualities of the materials and what you're working with, you're never going to get the best results. And I think, especially when, you mentioned that you were looking to the traceability and, the whole conundrum of how to get deeper and deeper and that knowledge piece, interior designers have a real effect, because when you design a piece, for it to be sustainable, it starts from the timber, but it also starts from your design, the intent of it. And if the design intent, the aesthetic, marry the qualities of the material and also respect the processes that you're going to follow and the skills you're going to be using, then you're really going to make the most of that particular piece. And, something, especially when it's made by hand, what is made by hand will inevitably be able to be restored, be able to be taken apart, be able to sort of be given new life, or move from one location to another and give it new life. So, interior decorators, you have a huge impact on that, because if you embrace all these elements, then you can, embed circular design into your own practice, much like we do. And that's where, that's why we support you. We have that whole breadth of knowledge from, how to, source the timber, but it's also, right, how do we engineer this piece? There's many ways of making a piece of furniture. So you can also be very clever that, if you use this technique, then you'll be able to disassemble it in a much easier fashion. If you use this finish, you will be able to restore it. Or if the piece of furniture is no longer fit for purpose, you'll be able to pull away the materials and reuse them for other pieces or, other projects. So understanding all that, if that can be embedded from the very moment a piece of furniture is designed for a project, that is hugely impactful.
Yeah.
It starts from the It starts from the impulse.
So we're both B Corps, and we're thinking a lot about kind of scope 3 and traceability, as we said. So Goldfinger is quite advanced in this area, as you've told our listeners. But how do you feel about the kind of the wider industry, and how do you feel they're doing? What do you think companies, I suppose, like us, can do to raise the bar, as it were?
I think what we see in general is that there are companies who care and who are at different stages of their journey and who are really, trying to grapple with something that is, is far bigger than any of us.
Easy. Yeah.
It is far bigger than any of us. The knowledge you need is vast, and the number of people you work with is also rather vast usually. You're not just relying on 1 or 2 people. They themselves are relying on 2 or 3 other people behind them, if not 10 or 100. So inevitably it can be quite daunting. So kudos to everyone who's trying to embark on that journey, whether at the beginning or at the end. It really is a process. But I would say, it's a knowledge piece. It's a willingness to do it, because it really takes a huge amount of effort. And I think collectively we need to support one another, along that journey, because, you were very kind to sort of host us the other day for a B Corp breakfast, looking at how we all recertify, which is a very daunting prospect at the moment. So sharing that pool of knowledge, supporting one another is hugely important. And also because it will allow everyone to go beyond, I would call, surface sustainability. A lot of, sustainability reporting is about ticking boxes and keywords, and that, most people don't necessarily really understand. And we were talking about certifications earlier, and, sometimes it's also understanding what you're embracing. There's certain certifications at international level that you would think you'd be able to trust and be confident about, and the problem is you start digging into them, and some will not tell you where the timber actually comes from. And, beyond the one size fits all, you won't even know where the timber truly comes from. It could come from Russia, it could come from Amazonia, it could come from anywhere. So, does your carbon footprint is respectable? Was the method, truly right for this particular area? Some will embrace single species forests, which are, it's a lovely thought that we all plant for harvest, but it doesn't support a local ecosystem. And likewise, some certifications will allow 10 hectares to be cut all at once. So 10 hectares is huge. Trees can take 5, 10, 20, 100 years to grow. It supports all the local wildlife. So when you cut 10 hectares, in our lifetime, we are not going to recuperate that. So that's where the journey is really hard.
Yeah.
Because even the tools that we have now are imperfect. And if we don't know them and we don't share that knowledge and we don't share the flags or the benefits with one another, it's a very difficult journey to sort of follow. So, I think we have to stick together.
Oh, for sure.
Be brave.
Yeah, that's it.
And be bold and persevere. But it is difficult.
Yeah. And I suppose being brave and bold, I mean, it doesn't kind of stop there. If we just tell our listeners, I suppose, the breadth of everything that you've done and people you've worked with, clients like Gales, the Tate, the Design Museum, how does working with those kind of cultural institutions and large brands differ from kind of your typical residential project?
At the end of the day, we all have the same conundrums. Space, timings, budgets, all of these items, but they are magnified, on the day-to-day. But beyond that magnification and, the difficulties of serving the cafe of a museum that has 10,000 people walking through its doors every day, it's also, there's a sense of responsibility and accountability. Those institutions belong to the public, and therefore are funded by the public. And that's where it's really important that we do our duty as best we can when we source our timber and our processes, that we give them something back that is meaningful. So, for the Tate Cafe, it was developed during a period where the country was really fighting against ash dieback. A lot of trees were being felled to create a sort of protective layer so the disease wouldn't spread. But what was to happen to all that timber? Suddenly there was an overwhelming amount of it. So, it made sense to us that we should capture some of the ash that was being felled for this particular reason. And, all the more important, to have those coordinates, to prove in a way and keep telling that story, because yes, it's proof, but the story lives on through the GPS coordinates. So, those elements, when you're in that sort of context, really matter, because you're speaking of a nation. You're giving back to the people, but also people visiting the country.
Yeah.
You're sharing, the story,
the history,
and the values, and
for sure.
that sense of heirloom and passing on a piece as well. What are we passing on?
And off the back of that, kind of, I suppose the polar opposite, in a world of kind of fast interiors and kind of quick turnarounds, how do you think repair, emotional connection, and all of those things kind of work in furniture? How do we maybe shift the mindset, or what challenges do you face?
Well, I think fast interiors, first and foremost, is not really Goldfinger's world, as you possibly have
exactly,
guessed. But I think, the fast interiors is a very recent thing, to be honest. It's the last, it's post-Second World War, really, where, industry and, factories, have truly developed at full speed and using man-made materials that behave and, do what they're told and never fluctuate. So I think for the people who operate in that space, there would be lots of things to rediscover from looking back and looking at, humbler ways and the more traditional ways. Not to say that they can't coexist and one is better than the other, absolutely not. They each have their place. But I think by looking how a craftsman operates, how he considers his timber, how he works with it, how he would adapt a technique for it rather than force feeding the material into something that it just simply will not do, but also respecting the materials, understanding that it will take 10, 20 years or 50 years to get it back. That there are great learnings there, and also appreciating that maker works with his hands, so he will not do something that is, I don't want to say not natural, but something that can evolve, that can grow with age, that can be touched again, where man can intervene again. Because I think that the true issue with man-made fast interiors is you cannot restore, you cannot repair. That material that behaves so beautifully, without flaws and everything, once it's broken or it's done its use, you cannot reuse again, you cannot restore. So suddenly you are cutting off people and that knowledge into that process. So if you welcome, people and knowledge and skill into your making, that you'll be able to rely on them again when, time will pass. And, that building will change its usage when, something would have happened. And life can carry on, but it is something that has been a bit lost. And when you look at, people who lived with antiques, have always kept a relationship with the local maker, the local restorers, because they knew that, that chair, that leg can be repaired, or that bed can be passed on because it can be restored. So understanding this is a process of multi-generations, I think that is something to look at and see how it can translate. I don't know. I mean, that's their expertise. But I think, look, listen, and see the takeaways you can have.
Lovely. And what one thing do you think clients always underestimate about furniture making?
It is a process.
It
is a process of time. And, it's... First, you're using timber. Timber is a living material. We touch upon the story of it, how it grew and where it comes from. But even when the timber, the tree is cut, it will carry on living. That timber that you're using will tell you how it's been cut, how it's been seasoned, how it's been used in the furniture making. But also it will tell you a story about the environment that it is in. If it's dry, if it's humid, if it's cold, if it's hot, if it's at the same sort of altitude. It will carry on living. So I think we all need to embrace it. We all have to embrace it, and we've become so accustomed to things just doing what they need to do, rather than allowing space for that process and allowing that it is all right for it to carry on living. So that's where we put a lot of knowledge into it. We try to sort of preempt a lot of things, use the timber in certain ways so that the timber can expand and can shrink and have all its lovely movement. But it is part of it. And the other piece is, if you're working with local craftsmen, they have an infrastructure. There's a cost of living there. There's a certain wage. There's health and safety considerations. All of these things have a cost. So I think one thing that is hugely underestimated is the cost of it all. You cannot ask traditional makers who are using sustainably sourced timber to compete with, pieces that are machine made, using man-made materials. And if you're asking them to do that, the thing is, all of them wear their heart on their sleeves. And what they will do for you is cut their profit and even make it at a loss, because they want to make it for you. So I think, yes, it's understanding how it's made so you can design better, but it's also appreciating that little bit extra that they're asking for. There's a huge amount of value there. And we have to sort of decide what's best, long term. You'll be able to reinvest in that one and those wonderful people and those wonderful processes and materials. So you're investing in capital rather than something that you will discard. And I think we have to look at it in a different way. So I would just encourage, everyone to think of, the whole chain of people and breadth and knowledge that goes beyond, and what value do we want to sort of associate to that.
Eleanore, thank you. This has been so informative for our listeners, and just something really quite wholesome and noble as well. So we should wrap up on a bit more of a kind of a question about you. Goldfinger, James Bond reference or something else?
It is, in a way. There's definitely a story there. Goldfinger was founded at the foot of Tradick Tower, which was designed by Eleanore Goldfinger. Hence the name.
Right.
But we all have to see Tradick Tower for what it is. I mean, it is a monument of brutalist architecture. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been. It is utterly brilliant from that perspective. And it served this community extremely well. But it is a tower. It is vast, It is tall, it doesn't speak the same aesthetic as the rest of the city, especially when it was built. And where there were people who were fierce advocates for it because of the social qualities of the building, there were also people who were fiercely against it, saying, it was disfiguring the city. And one of its key opponents was Ian Fleming. And he was so virulent about it that he named his villain Goldfinger. There you have it.
Oh my goodness, I love that. So what is the dream furniture piece that you would love to own?
Ooh, I've always a bit slightly obsessed. It's not a piece of furniture, so I will put my hand up.
I'm over talking about it.
I do love the Wiener Werkstätte. I think it's a design. It's a period of design that was absolutely wonderful. So the great meat of design, craftsmanship, but also new processes. And one of the things they did beautifully were those beautiful tea sets. And a designer like Christopher Dresser, designed beautiful, very elegant, simple pieces in silver, handmade. But the aesthetic resonates and starts to pick up on, new tools and new techniques. We can't discard, CNC is great. It all brings these things. And they just had the right balance between, modern technology, creativity, and traditional, materials and know-how. So, you can get me a tea set or you.
Oh my goodness, noted.
I wish I had that on my wedding list, but there we are.
Thank you so much. It's been really, really great to have you here today.
Likewise.
Thank you.